it's time to sit back and relax with your favorite drink. And listen. A young Vatican scholar discovers the terrifying secret behind the building of Hadrian and Antonine's wall. The Horror Behind the Wall by Taxi Dancer. Tonight, we read The Second Scroll. The night passed without incident, and we continued our search in the pre-dawn hours the next day, leaving the open valley and descending up the misty slopes of the low foothills. The men broke their fast as they rode, chewing on hard-tack bread soaked in brine and washing it down with water. It was a poor morning meal for the men, but our time for searching was rapidly coming to an end. The smell of rot which plagued my dreams was gone. However, that may have been because there was no wind to carry the foul scent. With a growing apprehension and dread in my heart, an affliction which I could scarcely explain, I led the cavalry further up into the hills, still following the trail left by my brother's cohort who had gone before me. Though I could hardly see the path ahead, I could sense that we'd rounded the top of the hill and were now headed down. The view from the hilltop only gave me a picture of trees poking from atop nearby hilltops, their base swallowed by the thick mist. Even though I knew that hidden somewhere in those clouds were the enemy which had caused my brother's disappearance, I knew also that my brother was somewhere in those mists too. "Shall I send some scouts ahead to flush out any ambushes?" said Evander. "The enemy has eyes in the damned trees and fog, sir," added Rufus. "If they spied upon our travels yesterday, it would be a sure bet that they know we're taking the path of our brethren who came before us. If I were to plan an attack, it would be here, as we descend into the mists." Well, of course, Evander and Rufus were right, but I hated to wait any longer for a scouting party to return. I was about to turn and give the order to have a scouting party from each cohort descend into the vale, when I felt the wind's direction change. A sickening smell of death and decay assailed my nose from somewhere down in the mists. My men smelled the odor as well, as I kicked my heels and spurred my horse into a quick gallop down the path, shrouded in clouds of fog. My men followed me without question. I was in the lead, following the trail of hoofprints left by my brother's cohort, looking for any trace that perhaps some of the hoofprints led back in the direction in which they came, indicating that some may have survived a retreat. Sadly, all I saw were hoofprints going in one direction, northeast, towards yet another hilltop. We splashed through an ice-cold stream before bounding up the shallow hill on the other side, the senior ranks ordering the archers to notch arrows and the rest to draw swords. The smell of death and decay surrounded us as we fanned out, vengeance pumping in our blood as we were sure that this was where the enemy would strike. With a roar, we rushed up the hill towards where the savages had surely set another trap. But we would not be caught unawares as our steeds charged up that slope, the steel of spear and sword slicing through the mists. As if in response to our charge, the winds picked up, blowing the mist into a white whirlwind which gradually removed our fog blindness as the smell of death increased and consumed us. As I reached the peak of the hill, I halted my horse abruptly. It whinnied in surprise as I yanked back on his reins and jumped from my saddle, my gladius in one hand. I yanked my spear from my sleeve on my horse's flank and charged screaming with rage the rest of the distance up to the top of the hill. They were there. They were there. Stacked one on top of the other, by the dozens on 4 piles, was our missing cavalry cohort. The fires which had been used to create their funeral pyres must have been great indeed, as the bodies of our men had been blackened to a crisp. I walked on the burned ground in between the pyres of the corpses of our black, charred men, yelling for my brother. "Albus! Albus!" I will still hope that he was still alive, as someone must have been alive to have honored our fallen dead in this way. "Albus, brother, where are you?" Their heads. Where are their heads? Evander and Rufus came up behind me, swords drawn, after they ordered their men to form a defensive perimeter around the hilltop. "Why would those savages behead our men before burning them?" grunted Rufus angrily. "This is something that they've never done in the past. These men have been defiled." I looked again at the bodies of the dead and cursed myself for my careless blindness. Beheading our men before burning them was a dishonor to them, cursing their spirits to search forever for their missing heads and robbing them of the ability to travel to the afterlife. This was something that my brother would never have ordered, and my heart sank at that. Indeed, his charred, headless body was likely among those in the stacks, and still the smell of rot permeated the air. "My liege, I fear that I have found the answer to the mystery." I raced to where the horrified soldier was standing at the misty edge of the clearing. The slowly lifting fog had initially hidden the dread from me which the soldier had stumbled upon. The mists parted to reveal a large pile of the missing, rotting heads of our fallen comrades. Filled with unrestrained grief, I fell upon the pile, peeking through the heads with tears in my eyes like a madman as I searched for my brother's head. There was something off with the severed heads which didn't seem right in a situation in which nothing seemed right. These men died at least 8 days ago, but the rate of decomposition seemed far too advanced, as if the men had been decapitated months after they died. To their credit, several of the men with strong constitutions began pulling the putrid, maggot-covered heads from the pile and reverently lined them up on the ground. In total, there were 106 heads in the pile. "My liege," said Evander solemnly, "is your brother among the fallen?" "No," I said, the flame of hope sputtering alive again. "He is not among these honored dead." I had examined every head lying upon the ground, and even in their advanced state of decay, I could tell that none of these men was my brother. "What happened to your hand, Evander?" Evander looked down at his bleeding palm, now wrapped in a white cloth stained with blood. "It's nothing, my liege. One of the heads took a bite out of my hand, a spasm that lingers after death." "Well, have one of the medicus supply medicine and poultices to your wound," I advised, "just in case." "I shall have this tended to later, my liege," Evander replied. 14 of our men yet remain unaccounted for, and I'll not let a small scratch hamper our mission any further." We had gathered the heads together again, careful to avoid the occasional post-mortem spasmodic gnashing of teeth, which eerily made them seem both alive and hungry. We set another funeral pyre, burning all of the heads amidst prayers that their spirits could now go in peace to the afterlife. By this time the sun was almost at the mid of day, the morning mists having long since burned away. We were in a wide clearing atop that hill, and we could see hoofprints which led down into another wide valley of green rolling plains, the clear skies revealing black ravens circling overhead. "Death's hand has recently cursed that place," said Rufus. "A battle took place there." "Our time is short," I replied. "Before nightfall we must be on our way back to the wall. The terrain allows us to deploy our forces more advantageously here. Let's see if we cannot solve this mystery before our time runs out." The path we took weaved around the hilltop before dipping down into the valley. A giant, ancient elm tree greeted us as we rounded the bend, great branches completely overhanging the entire path. I stopped and gasped in shock as, hanging from the branches of the tree, were 14 bodies. Ignoring Evander and Rufus's offer to ride ahead and investigate the bodies, I galloped towards the tree, my heart now grieving as I suspected that my search for my brother had come to an end. He stared down at me with dead eyes, a sad expression on his wounded face, the rope creaking in the wind. "Why, Albus? You survived. Why did you and the others who survived have to do this? Why did you behead your honored dead before sending their spirits on their way? Why did you leave so many mysteries? Oh, who attacked you, Albus?" The parchment was still gripped in my brother's gloved hands, and I gingerly slipped it from his dead grasp. Unrolling the parchment, I read the words written upon it in my brother's handwriting. May my honored fallen forgive me for taking their heads before burning their bodies. It was the only way to be sure that the cohort does not rise again. Those of us who'd survived the attack cannot be sure that we were not infected by the demonic sorcery of the Caledonians. We dare not return to the war bringing the pestilence of the Caledonians with us. So we have decided to end the curse here at this tree. May we be forgiven, but no other choice was left. Beware the sorcerers, for they control the dead. God, what madness had taken over you and the 13 others who survived that caused you to write this witchery? Well, the ambush which had taken the lives of your cohort had obviously driven sanity from you. At least we know for sure who committed this travesty. And when our campaign begins in earnest, I promise you, my brother, that the Caledonians will pay 100-fold for every man we lost. I turned my horse to the tree, no longer able to stand the heartbreak welling up inside me. My liege, whispered Rufus as he sauntered his horse next to mine. Cut them down, Rufus, I said. Cut them down and render them the proper honours which they deserve. Of course, my liege, he answered, calling a work detail forwards to complete this grisly task. Evander attempted to call a work party of his own cohorts, but began coughing instead. I turned to see that he'd grown somewhat pale and was sweating. Evander, are you okay? I am, my liege, he answered, clearing his throat. Curse the damned dreary weather here in Britain. I cannot wait until we subjugate these savages so that we can return to the warmer climes of Hispania. As the last 14 of the fallen cohort were placed on the funeral pyre, I sat upon my steed, staring down into the valley where they fought their last battle. Evander and Rufus sat silently at my side on their horses. Silently, I cursed the ungodly savages who had done this. Come out, damn you. I know you're out there. I have twice the number of cavalry here. Come out that I may fertilize the valley with your entrails. My heart was afire with the desire of vengeance. To hell with the coming main campaign. I wanted to begin the attack now, starting from this hill. My liege, said Rufus. I looked in the direction where the cohort commander was pointing. Emerging from the trees which surrounded the valley was a pale, decrepit-looking figure. The thin man, dressed only in ragged furs, which only covered his waist, shambled out into the field as if drunk. In his withered hand was a rusted axe. "Ugh," grunted Evander in disgust. "That one looks rough even for a savage. He is also someone who may lead us to who committed this atrocity." I grabbed up my spear and made to spur my steed forwards down into the valley, but Rufus stayed my hand. "My liege, wait, look." Behind the figure came dozens more savages, dressed similarly to the first with ragged clothing and fur. And just like the first, they had a shambling gait, as if unused to walking on their bony legs. They were deathly pale, some even missing limbs, those without legs dragging themselves across the ground. Many of them held makeshift weapons, pitchforks, spears, butcher knives, and short swords, all in various states of rust and disrepair. Haunted howling and moaning bellowed up from their abdomens, their skin so torn that we could clearly see their rib cages. A lone figure on horseback emerged from the woods, hidden under a large robe coloured a dark mottled green. The figure held a gnarled wooden staff in the air in one hand and was waving his other hand in such a way as that of a magician casting a spell. As the black smoke of the funeral pyre behind me swirled around my face, the sickening smell of flesh slowly cooking in the fires, I raised my spear and ordered, "Lancers to the fore! Fall upon the foe with vengeance and no mercy." A mighty roar echoed across the hilltop, and the ground trembled as the 200 cavalrymen of my two cohorts thundered down the hillside, every man eager for revenge and bloodshed. Yet strangely, There was very little bloodshed as the distance rapidly closed, and the first line of lancers struck the foe. As we neared the foe, the stink of rot and decay assailed our senses, and I had to spur my horse onwards through the putrid stench as my lance crashed into the skeletal man who first emerged from the trees. My spear punched him through the chest, ripping the man in half, then pierced another through the side. The savage, though skewered on my lance, continued to grasp at me, using my own lance to pull himself towards me. The sharp iron head of my spear struck yet another savage, easily taking his arm off before it finally snapped after punching a fourth savage through the head. I dropped my now useless weapon and drew my gladius, realizing that something was horrifyingly wrong with the foe. The man whom I'd ripped in half was still alive, crawling towards me with his entrails dragging behind him, hands grabbing and mouth snapping in hunger. The second, still with the spear shaft through his chest, was shambling after me, waving a rusted sword crazily as if he did not know how to use his arms. The savage whose arm I'd torn off was also standing as if unhurt by the grievous wound. He'd been slashed a number of times by my riders as they charged past, but the foe still remained afoot, clumsily grabbing at my men as if to pull them from their mounts. Only the fourth enemy, one whom I decapitated with my spear, lay unmoving on the ground. Though the foe was taking mortal injuries from my men, injuries which should have bathed the ground crimson with their blood, there was very little bleeding. We were stabbing and hacking limbs and gouging guts from the enemy, but there was very little bloodshed, as if the blood of the savages had congealed a long time ago. And even though many of the savages were armed with rudimentary weapons, they seemed to know how to use them even less than their own arms, preferring instead to grab a rider to bring him down and to attack by biting. In this way, a number of our riders were pulled from their mounts and immediately set upon by the savages. But the gods were with many of them as they were able to fend off the enemy and regain their mounts. Still, others were not so fortunate, their screams turning to chokes, their quivering arms and legs spasming as the damned savages tore chunks of flesh from their throats. Two of the foe cornered my steed, but he reared up, kicking one of the savages' head into mush with a powerful kick. The second foe reached desperately towards my arm, a hiss coming from his lungs as his mouth opened and closed hungrily. I struck him with a blow across the chest, which would have shattered his ribcage and destroyed his lungs and heart. But the savage continued forwards. With his arms outstretched, I brought my sword down again, severing both. The enemy fell backwards, seemingly unconcerned, as he struggled to get back up, rage filling his dead-looking eyes. "They are virtually unkillable," growled Rufus as he fought his way to my side. "What demons possess these savages?" "Hunger bordering on cannibalism," I yelled, "and potions which have caused them not to feel pain, but have also driven them mad." As the armless savage lunged at my horse, mouth agape, I swung my sword downwards, sundering his head from his shoulder. The enemy finally collapsed unmoving on the battlefield. Likewise, Rufus swept his sword in a wide arc, lopping off the heads of the two savages which were threatening him. We both yelled out to the men to sever their heads from their shoulders. But most of those that had survived thus far had already learned the secret of killing these seemingly unkillable savages. Though the enemy seemed to act as one, like ants, individually they were weak and against the discipline of Roman training and sharpened steel. The savages fell headless in droves. As the threat to my men lessened, I began to wonder about this enemy. Their numbers were roughly equal to ours, so the end result of this battle was hardly in doubt. But still, my brother's cohort should have been able to solve the riddle of slaying these savages and easily dispatch them. My angry gaze once again turned to the mysterious figure on horseback. The rider's hood was pulled back, revealing a withered face, wisps and strands of long grey hair sprouting from a liver-spotted head. He was smiling, revealing a mouth of yellow, ragged teeth. 4 other robed riders emerged from the woods, each one also carrying a gnarled wooden staff aloft, and each waving the other hand as if evoking some kind of barbaric incantation. In an instant of horrific realization, I knew how my brother's cohort had been defeated. This wasn't the ambush. This was the bait which sprung the true ambush. The smell of putrid rotten decay increased tenfold as 1,000 more of the cannibalistic Caledonian savages shambled from the woods from the north, west, and east. "My liege," yelled Rufus. "It was an ambush." "I know, Rufus," I yelled, glaring at the 4 Caledonian riders who were obviously the commanders and masterminds behind this ambush. "Trumpeters, sound the withdrawal." The piercing peals of my signaller's trumpets rang out across the battlefield, and, in disciplined and uniform order, my men turned their steeds to the south and swiftly retired from the battlefield. Rufus, Evander, and I rode last, observing to ensure that the units retired in good order. The ground was littered with hundreds of the enemy, but I counted at least 20 of our fallen amongst the dead. Among our cavalry, I also saw that a few had suffered bite marks of varying degree, inflicted by those savages driven mad by hunger. Evander coughed again, his head hanging down. He was deathly pale. "Evander," I said, "are you well?" "It's nothing, my liege," he coughed. "Damned weather here. Hot and rainy, cold and rainy, dreary and rainy. No wonder all Britons look pale and mouldy and smell of swamp." "Can you ride?" "Yes, my liege," Evander said unsteadily, never looking up. "Let us away." I looked at the wrapping covering his hand, and was startled to see that the red blood had turned a deep purple. I looked over to Rufus, whose look of concern mirrored my own. With the encroaching enemy horde only a few paces behind us, we spurred our horses on to join the rear guard of the cavalry, Rufus and I taking up positions on either side of Evander in case he should fall from his saddle. We galloped back up the hill which he charged down earlier, passing the still burning funeral pyre which we had created for my brother and his men, past the smouldering fire of the heads which we'd set ablaze earlier, and finally past the charred remains of the bodies of my brother's fallen cohort. We followed our own tracks down the other side of the hill and back across the wide valley which we'd ridden through the day before. The foe was less than 2 leagues behind us when I ordered the pace to slow. Shortly thereafter, Evander fell from his horse. He was by now almost white, his breathing shallow, and he was burning with fever. The medicus removed the wrapping from his hands, and the smell of rot exuded from his black, gangrenous wound. They put more healing herbs and poultices on the festering wound, but sadly the medicus said that, in order to save his life, we would have to take his arm when we made camp. Not knowing how much of a lead we had ahead of the foe, I ordered that Evander be made as comfortable as possible and strapped down to his mount. Rufus offered to lead Evander's mount himself, as Evander's second-in-command took control of his cohort. As we crossed the valley, I kept the pace slow, as both horses and men were tired. As night approached, I halted the column about a half a league from the forest at the base of the foothills, beyond which lay Antonine's Wall and the safety of the Glasgow Bridge Tower. I ordered the men to make camp and allowed for fires to be set, along with torches to be placed around the camp perimeter. Since the savages already knew we were here, there was no need to try and hide our presence. Thankfully, the skies were clear, so for once the men could rest without the rains to dampen their spirits. As camp was being constructed, I raced to the medicus to check on the condition of Evander. Regretfully, the medicus informed me that our brave cavalry cohort commander's spirit had left his body sometime during the journey. Deeply saddened at his passing, I decided to bring his body with us back to Antonine's Wall, for a proper honouring of his passing, instead of burning his corpse here. It's a decision which I would later regret. By now the full moon and stars were illuminating the black, cloudless skies. I scarcely had time to mourn the loss of Evander, when the rear guard which I'd ordered to keep watch from the hilltop we'd abandoned came galloping into the camp. Their anxious commander reported that the enemy was on the march and had been joined by 2 more barbaric tribes, these men seeming much more fit and whole compared to the savages we'd encountered today. wearing primitive armor and brandishing better weaponry and shields. Curiously, these new tribesmen seemed very fearful of the savages we'd fought earlier and kept a good distance from them. Separating the two groups were more of the mysterious cloaked riders, now numbering about 20, and these riders seemed to be just as disdained as the foul-smelling cannibals which the riders commanded. Still, the only men on horse were these strange cloaked riders, and their force of about 3,000 were advancing at a walking pace towards our positions. At that pace it would take them about a day to reach us, at which time I planned to be long gone. Still, I ordered that a small picket of rearguard scouts remain at least a league behind us, just in case. However, no sooner had I heard this than I was also informed by the medicus that at least 30 more of my cavalrymen had fallen ill, each having been bitten by those savages, their wounds severe enough to have drawn blood, and were showing the same signs of advanced putridity as Evander. In the ensuing 3 hours, all of them fell into delirium, then coma, then death. The medicum had no answer to this mystery, and I ordered the bodies to be wrapped in cloth, to be taken back to the wall, as we needed to know what kinds of poisons the savages were using to cause such horrific afflictions on our men. It was only later on, in the blackness of the after midnight, that I learned the horrific reason why my brother decapitated the men who died under his command. No sooner had I fallen into a fitful sleep than I was awoken to the terrified screams of men coming from outside my tent. I emerged, sword in hand, to see that the sentries who guarded my tent were gone. Looking to my right, where I had previously had the bodies of the fallen wrapped in their cloaks and lying on the ground, I saw that their cloaks had been tossed aside, the bodies missing. Initially, I thought that the savages had entered the camp and were somehow attempting to steal the bodies. However, in the silhouette of the fires, I could see shadows of my men bending over, as if feasting on the struggling bodies of my other living men, their screams of terror echoing through the darkness. Something hit me hard out of the darkness to my right, and I tumbled to the ground, my sword leaving my hands. I rolled over and looked up at my attacker, clearly expecting to see a savage, cannibalistic Caledonian staring back at me. Instead, the animalistic eyes which met my gaze belonged to dead Evander, his hungry maw chomping. I had no time to reach for my fallen sword as Evander fell upon me, but as I felt his jaws near my face, I also heard a violent yell, followed by a gust of wind. Evander's head fell away as his body suddenly dropped heavily upon me, putrid-smelling, congealed blood soaking my tunic. Above me, Rufus stood with sword in hand. "My liege," he gasped, "our dead walk, and they are attacking and eating the living." Pushing the body of Evander off me, I shuddered. "Take the heads of the dead, and all those whom they've bitten." What follows is the most terrifying and tragic night of my life, as 1 hour later, all of the risen dead were finally decapitated and burning in the fires, but leaving me with 20 of my men kneeling before me, their hands and feet bound by rope, each of them suffering bleeding bites caused by their dead comrades. Despite their piteous cries for mercy, I ordered that each have their heads be removed from their bodies by the grieving comrades. Not wanting to spend one more second in this unholy land, I ordered our survivors to pack what they could as quickly as possible and retreat back to the wall. Here ends the second scroll of Chief Centurion and Camp Prefect Lucius Latinimus Marcel. The last scroll of his writings concludes his account, and it is here that I pray that the last scroll will never be read, as what is written within will reveal ancient and forbidden secrets that may plunge the world into hell. So there you go with episode 2. Tell me you didn't see that coming. Go on, you didn't, did you? Wow, that was an unexpected turn of events, I would have to say. Didn't think the Scottish would unleash a zombie army on the Romans. Well, Who would have thought it? So yeah, this is definitely holding up. And like I said, I will be completing this tomorrow night. So you'll have the full 1.5 hour story available tomorrow evening around about this time. So, yeah, I guess you've already listened to this, so you know what's coming. If you haven't listened to this and you're not listening to this right now, then there's going to be a nice surprise for you for tomorrow evening, but you're not going to know about it because you're not listening to this. This isn't making any sense at all now. So, enough for one evening. Back again tomorrow with the final part. Till then, my dear friends, sweet dreams and bye-bye. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this story today. Really means a lot to me and to the author of the story, of course. Well, if you want to know more about me, I'm pretty much everywhere on social media. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can download my music on SoundCloud. I've got a Patreon if you feel like. Throw me $1 or $2. Very much appreciated. And of course, on Reddit, I have a place where you can leave stories if you want me to read one that you've written. Well, hoping to see you all again very soon. Till then, sweet dreams. Bye-bye.